Welcome to the Cycling Over 60 podcast, Season 2, Episode 19, A Lifelong Medicine to Maintain Vitality. And I'm your host, Tom Butler. I got a big asset this week to help me with my challenge for this season. The map from Adventure Cycling Association arrived, and it is awesome. As a reminder, the map is the first section of the Northern Tier bicycle route. The whole route goes from Anacortes, Washington to Bar Harbor, Maine. I will only be doing Anacortes to Newport, Washington. Section 1 actually goes a little further to Sandpoint, Idaho. The route is also called U.S. Bike Route 10. This is the first map I have ever seen that is specifically made for cycling, and it is just packed full of useful information. I'm not going to take the time here to go into everything because it would just be too long, but go online to Adventure Cycling Association and take a peek at what their maps include. I do want to highlight their field notes. The map even includes these neat little info bites about things along the route, like how the Douglas fir got its name. It's just a fantastic job by the Adventure Cycling Association cartographers, in my opinion. There is one reason that the map is important to me, and that is because my wife is really questioning my decision to ride across Washington now. She sees it as not the right challenge for this time. Personally, I'm not questioning this decision at this time, but she will need some perspective that it is safe. The map helps with that, but I think we're going to have to drive a part of the route at some point. That will either confirm her fears or show her that the route is safe. And then there's also the element that she doesn't think that this physical challenge is really what I need right now. But I don't really think it's going to be that physically demanding, although I might find out I'm wrong about that. I did another bike fitting this week, this time for my Roubaix, and just like before, I found it to be extremely helpful. I went to Erik Moen here in the Seattle area. He is a physical therapist and a bike fitter. For me, this is basically an essential combination. His practice is called corpore sano, inspired by a Roman concept of health. Corpore sano means healthy body in Latin. Erik is the full deal and was extremely thorough. It is hard for me to imagine that anybody could do a better job. He even gave me a pedaling lesson. He exceeded my expectations in so many ways. I will highlight just two adjustments that I believe will make my bike significantly more comfortable. First is that he put spacers to move the pedals out a little. That puts my feet in more alignment with my hips. I figure there aren't many things more important than avoiding thousands and thousands of pedal rotations with my feet out of alignment with my hips. He also put wider bars on, which puts my wrists and elbows in a better position. Another important change. Once again, I received feedback from Erik that I'm not even close to where I should be from a flexibility perspective. Am I the only one out here who has a hard time keeping limber? My flexibility had a real impact on what he was able to do with my bike setup. He would have liked to put a longer stem on my bike to fit my upper body better. However, he didn't because my lack of flexibility would have meant that the more aggressive position would have created strain. So I need to make improvements in my flexibility and then readjust again later. I have 4 more weeks of continuous glucose monitoring left. That means I have 4 more weeks to really dial in how to turn the bike into a fat-burning machine. I know that 90 minutes of low intensity really eats up the blood glucose, but I want to see what happens when I extend it to 2 hours, and also what happens when I ramp up the intensity. Erik recommended that I spend time on rides maintaining a 20-mile-an-hour pace as long as I can. That would definitely be a higher level of intensity for me. It would, in my opinion, be a form of interval training. I think I need that, and I think that would help me maintain or even raise my metabolism. There are still so many things for me to figure out when it comes to fueling longer rides. What foods can I eat, and how do I avoid not spiking my glucose? I have been interested in bringing on the podcast a physician that is also a cyclist and get their perspective. And I was able to find someone who I think is perfect. Dr. Patrick Hogan is a neurologist and has been an endurance athlete for decades. I was really happy to be able to get his thoughts on how maintaining fitness benefits his patients and also hear stories from his personal fitness journey. Here is our discussion. I am joined today by Dr. Patrick Hogan. And Dr. Hogan, I want to welcome you to the Cycling over 60 podcast.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I wanted you on this podcast from the very beginning. I didn't know it was you that I wanted, but I wanted someone with your professional and personal background. So this is great to be able to get your perspective on things. You have been in private practice since 1988, so you're not new to the field by any means.
Right.
And you currently are the director of Puget Sound Neurology, which is your clinic, I believe that's the right way to say it. And you've been the past president of the Pierce County Medical Society and have received many awards for your community service, which I think is awesome. And I was particularly interested in your work on the Tobacco-Free Coalition of Washington, what great work that was. Then also just working with numerous support groups for patients with varying neurological conditions. The final thing I want to point out is that you've been granted recognition as a Center of Excellence by the National Parkinson's Foundation. So I think that's impressive, the impact that you've had with patients and in the community and professionally. I just see all in all that is an awesome career.
Yeah, thank you.
The first thing I want to ask is something that I ask almost everybody, and that's, what is an early memory you have about biking?
Yeah, it starts really early, then skips a few decades. I'm not sure why I have this little early memory of getting on a bicycle and transitioning from training wheels. It's like I have very few memories of really early, but somehow that sticks in my mind. Maybe it was a momentous occasion or whatever.
I think that is.
Yeah. But at that point, why is it stuck in my mind? Then I wasn't that much into major biking except the usual things, until I started training for triathlons while I was stationed at the hospital in Hawaii in about 1984. After I did the Honolulu Marathon, I was kind of inspired to start doing triathlons and started getting on the bike. That was a steel Trek bike at that point, but it carried me over. It's kind of interesting, it's not about the bike, because even now I have my S-Works, Specialized X-Works, and my fancy tri bikes. I don't think I'm that much faster. It's not just about the bike. But anyway, that's some of my early memories.
You said 1984 in Hawaii, is that right? That's right. A pretty interesting time as far as the Ironman triathlon is concerned. Were you aware of that and at that time?
Yes, yeah, I was aware of it. It hadn't started that much earlier than that, actually, in the later 70s, But this was an Olympic triathlon that I trained for. That was beyond my capacity at that point. Subsequently I've done the Ironmans, but at that point, but I was aware of the developing interest and craze for our triathlons at that point in the early 80s.
So you have made a commitment. That commitment was higher than typical commitment to exercise and to performance. And you made that commitment and you've stuck with that commitment. How did that come about part of your life?
Yes, it's a great question. It really wasn't until probably I got to Washington State in the end of the 80s, early 90s, where I really became more committed to endurance athletics. And I think it was just a kind of blessing that I had, it just fit with me. It's almost another major question of, why do people not do that, or why do they stop? We can kind of get to that, But after that point, then it became part of my daily routine over the last 30 some years, that I kind of hadn't been as committed during my residency in medical school, but then afterwards really it felt that it just fit with my personality and my goals to have goals. I guess that's what pushes me is, to have a goal, because goals kind of pull me over to the next day and make me want to do that exercise on days which you're not really motivated otherwise to do so. But along that same line, one of the major questions I always wonder about that question is, why is it that everybody doesn't do that? And part of it is I think people have had a negative experience with exercise even growing up. And so it becomes a challenge or a chore to them rather than a pleasure. And that's kind of along that line. I've been sponsoring a yearly run a mile day program for young kids in this area. It used to be a national program, but we've kind of carried it on with the idea of making exercise a fun endeavor rather than a chore or a punishment, as it was in some situations back then. And I also sponsor an annual swim event in Minnesota that gets a lot of young people out in this endurance swim. These are things that are positive experiences and carry on throughout life. But I think most people don't have that, and somehow they think of exercise as a chore or a punishment, and don't feel the need to be uncomfortable. And we need to be uncomfortable sometimes to be comfortable in the long term. And the other aspect is people get excuses. And the whole idea to be committed to exercise is not to have excuses. And people always say, my knee hurts, my back hurts, or it's too cold, or it's too hot, or it's raining. There should be the concept of you can always do something. Even if you're limited in some aspect, you always can do something. And so we try to get that across to patients all the time, because there's a lot of people that have good excuses not to do certain forms of exercise, but there should never be a time when they don't do it at all. And so that's still a major goal, is to try to get, and I try to work with that all the time, try to get more people involved in exercise.
It's interesting to me, and for myself, I mean, this is true. I'm not immune of all these challenges to actually being active, but our bodies seem to be made for activity. And centuries ago, we had to be very active just as part of how we lived. And now we can choose how we're active. I can jump on a bike and go out on a beautiful trail and get my activity that way, rather than having to lift bales of hay or dig or whatever, was the physical demands of just living ages ago.
Exactly right.
You are part of the Cycling Over 60 Club. And also swimming over 60 and running over 60. I'm wondering if you have some highlights from your years of participating in events or training, things like that.
Right. I do have a lot of highlights that I can think back and be proud of. But I always think, these highlights are really like my goals that pull me forward. But it's really, I was really telling people that, especially my patients, that, the goal is gratifying, but it should be the steps toward the goal that should just be as rewarding. So each thing I do, I've done over 150 triathlons now, and I'm proud of it. I did 3 full Ironmans. Is a major goal, but it's all those steps to get to that goal were just as rewarding. And we did some major long bikes in the Dolomites, the Stelvio bike ride up the hill, and the Sella Ronda. This past May, my wife and I did the Sal Calabra. It's a climb up on the Isle of Mallorca off of Spain. So all these are really some of my highlights, and some of my long distance ramrod, riding around Mount Rainier are good goals, and I like looking back on the goals, but then also think of what it takes to get there and how rewarding that is.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about Ramrod. Did you feel like you knew what you were getting into? Was it kind of what you expected? How was that experience?
The first time I did it, it was pretty brutal, because I didn't have a good climbing bike, and I thought, it's no big deal, I can just do it. And it was pretty bad, but we made it. But subsequently, I did it a few more times, and had really good experience, and I was more trained again to go around the mountain. It's for people who don't know, it's a ride around Mount Rainier, about 160 miles in one day, and a lot of climbing, and pretty intense, but very rewarding.
And a pretty majestic experience, I think, probably.
That's a good point for all these things, besides the endurance and the exercise and the accomplishment, what you have around you and being with other people. That's one of the things that I really has driven me as much to keep on going in triathlons and some of these events, is to be around a whole group of people that are all like-minded, that all have this idea of maintaining fitness and enjoying the outdoors and enjoying the majesty of mountains and countryside. I agree with you.
You talked about that people have to, I think, make a decision that they're going to do something uncomfortable to elevate their fitness, to maintain fitness. And one of those, I think, is that it's hard with a busy lifestyle. And you are a neurologist, you own your own clinic, which is a business. So you're a business owner, and there's things that you have to do on that side as well as the clinical side. And your business is called Puget Sound Neurology. And yet you've been able to fit in training with a busy life that I'm sure also includes family.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of different interruptions or obstacles, I could say. Yeah, I think it's really important for medical providers in general to be fit. And we'll get back to the second why, how I maintain my fitness. But I started a number of years ago when I was president of the Medical Society of a coalition called the Coalition for Healthy Active Medical Professionals, CHAMP. And it was the whole idea that exercise is very important for providers, but still, even to this day, it's just so hard to get people with exactly what you just said, when they're busy in life, to recognize that maintaining fitness not only is good for their mental health and physical health, but transmits an example to their patients. So I think it's an important part of just being a medical provider to be fit. But I think what it requires, and this is again a goal for anybody, is to make it a routine. Routine is so important. It should, exercise should be as important and routine as sleeping, eating, and breathing. And so we do. I make it a daily routine. 6 days of aerobic and 1 day off with just yoga and weights. And I bike to work 1 day a week, 18 miles each way. So it kind of keeps, so I can't stop halfway, I got to get there. So again, it's a motivator, and so, that pushes me along. I think what's so important, I think what really is I've been blessed with is I have an exercise partner. My wife is also an athlete and triathlete, and having an exercise partner, someone that makes you accountable, it really helps you on days that when your motivation is floundering and you need someone else to have to kind of push you along that way. So that's been an inspiration and helps me to avoid excuses. And other things I do to maintain it, I try to do consecutive days, and that's really a good thing we try to encourage people to do, so to get on a goal so that you're doing something every day. So example, every day I do a yoga strengthening and stretching program along with my meditation that I do with Insight Timer. And so I now have 1,962 days as of this morning in consecutive days. And so you don't want to start over again if you miss a day. And at a certain point, when you get to 100 or 200 days, I don't want to go back to one. And then you get to 500, 600. So I think that's, something like that. I've heard of a number of people in the past, that have gotten into that routine where they don't want to break their streak. We all have to play mind games with this, I think, sometimes, because there's so many little obstacles that come into our mind. They say, not today, or let's do it later. But the idea is, if you say you're going to do it later, most of the time people don't get to it. You hear it all the time that with my patients. I plan on doing exercise, but I just didn't get to it. If you don't put it in your schedule, make it routine, most of the time you just don't get to it. So that's the whole idea of avoiding excuses. Do whatever you can, keep exercising, and make it a routine. Well, there is some balance to that. After my Achilles tendon ruptures, I was determined I'm not going to make this an excuse. I'm going to keep going. And I did a bike ride, and just 6 weeks later in the Sonoma bike ride, not even able to clip in yet. And then about 2 months afterwards, I wanted to do the Washington D.C. triathlon, which was happened to be on a 9/11 day, so it was really inspiring. But I had to run it in a boot, instead of a shoe. But that was a mistake. So that's my example. So sometimes you can don't make excuses, but you got to have wisdom. I think wisdom has come with age to realize, wait a second, there's a time when you do got to heal, and you just have to divert to another form of exercise, So it's a balance, not exercise, don't have excuses, but yet realize when you do have your limitations.
It's nice to hear that a physician can even make those kind of mistakes.
For sure.
I find it kind of interesting. We don't have, to me, natural pressures to be active. We don't have a lot of social pressure to be active. If I'm not eating, I feel hunger, and my body is like pushing me to eat, and to eat and eat. And I don't have that, that same kind of thing if I'm not being active. I mean, there are subtle cues like, oh, okay, my mood is the way it is because I haven't been active for a while or whatever. But there's not really like a lot of things that are really driving us to be active.
Yeah, that's correct. We're just in the opposite. We're so programmed to just the opposite, to preserve energy. Everything we do is preserve energy. Drive-throughs, remotes, everything we do is try to save energy when we should be doing just the opposite. Of looking for ways to be more active. To stand up throughout the day and rather than sitting. And that's right. We unless you're really habituated to it, and that's what we try to do in our situation. My wife and I is be so habituated to it that you don't feel good unless you do it. And but you're right. There's something wrong with that in our brains that we don't feel that same compulsion to do what's really good for us, and to lose a lot of the benefit even after a pretty short time of not exercising. Yeah, so right. It takes truly cognitive awareness that's just something that's as good for us as sleeping and eating and breathing.
Now, one thing that I know, and actually listeners of this podcast know, is that you have another member of your family, Dr. Adrienne McNamara, who is your daughter, and she's very active too. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the benefit of having an active family, not just a spouse.
Right. It inspires you. And my son is also very active. He's a wellness practitioner in movement and posture training in New York. So he's also very active. So both of them. And I think that part of it was because they did have positive exercise experiences when they were growing up. And that's going to maintain them throughout their life. It is inspiring. I learned from Adrienne a lot and inspired by Adrienne so often when she has her challenges, but she keeps going. No matter what her excuses are. She's a perfect example how someone who has some good excuses not to some exercise because of her physical limitations that she's had, but she keeps going. And same thing for my son. We've learned a lot from him as far as different posture training and exercise that we implemented in our day-to-day life.
At Puget Sound Neurology, you take what you call a whole body perspective to treatment, which I think is awesome. Can you talk about what that means and why you've chosen that focus?
I think that's so important that is not focused on very often in many medical practices. Is that you really shouldn't be focusing on one organ. People do they'll be the heart doctor and the gut doctor or the brain doctor, but rather than bring the whole body into the experience. The holistic treatment is medicine in itself. People are limiting their response to therapy by not encouraging people to live with positive lifestyle medicine. In our practice, we have a dietitian to deal with nutrition. We have Adrienne, who helps to develop her exercise physiologist to help develop exercise programs. And we have a yoga instructor, Pilates instructor, and dance instructor that come in to a room and have in our office for encouraging people, to give them kind of avoid some of the excuses they have of looking for some place to exercise. It's crucially important. Exercise is medicine, and I'm sure you've talked about that in some of your programs already. But especially for neurology, because there's a chemical process that occurs when the muscles are activated. So when the brain activates the muscles release a chemical in the muscles to feed back to the brain to release another chemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is the only way that we can really develop new neurons and new synaptic connections. Is an effect that you can't get in a pill. There's no medicine that can do it. And so this truly is why exercise truly is a medicine. In fact, I coined a term a number of years ago in my lectures, because exercise is medicine, but doesn't have a name like other drugs. And so I call it does it all. And does it all because it does. And so does it all is a medicine that we need to develop neuroplasticity. And we talk a lot about that in neurology nowadays, the neuroplasticity, that the brain is not a solid structure that doesn't change. It's constantly plastic and moving and developing, but you have to make it to happen. It's not going to happen automatically. So we need with the right, the right nutrition, the right stress release, sleep control, and especially exercise to produce that to happen. And along that, another word that we use a lot is something called hormesis. Hormesis means that the body adapts to stress. So you have to be uncomfortable sometime. So put your body through some stress in order for this to happen, for the positive effects to happen. But it needs to be, challenging and needs to be diversified. Because if you do one thing all the time, your brain adapts and it doesn't have any reason to have to improve further. So we're always encouraging people to find different ways, because why biking is a wonderful, spectacular exercise that we can do throughout our life. But it's pretty important to do alternate exercises for bone loading, whether it's weight training or running and lateral movements. My wife and I do ballroom dancing for the past 18 years. Probably like 5 hours a week in that area. Because it develops other forms of stimulation to your brain and lateral movement. So all these things are crucially important with every patient to get the most out of their treatment. If I just use their medication, they're going to get some benefit. But if you include all the holistic aspects of this, nutritional and exercise program and sleep control and stress control, you have great rewards and everybody, and people appreciate it.
Well, you're really triggering me when you talk about dancing. I went contra dancing a couple times years ago, and I don't know that I could handle ballroom dancing. I don't feel like I'm good at that.
People always say that they don't have rhythm. That it's a very common thing, and they feel intimidated by dance. But if you think of dance as a sport, like if you went out and started to learn how to play tennis, or if you learned other sports that you're just not used to doing, we all have innate rhythm. If you look at a little 2-year-old and they start putting music on, they'll bounce around and they have rhythm. But then we don't use it, and we kind of suppress it over all the years. Dancing, I think, for us, it's a crucial part of our exercise routine, because it brings in so many different aspects of movement rather than the straight ahead program that we do with swimming, biking, running, and it kind of fills out the gaps.
It sure seems like a complement to a lot of different exercises.
It does, yeah. I agree. I think, and it's fun. See, that's the thing about exercise. About some exercise we do, as we've talked about, is there's a lot of suffering that goes into a lot of what we do, with exercise, and unfortunately, that holds some people back. So it's nice to do exercise that's fun, and with dancing, it's not only a good union with a partner, but it has laughter and fun associated with it.
Talking about whole body approach, bringing in so many different things here, including the fun, and that being part of good medicine and good treatment. And I'm wondering also about the social aspects, and that's one thing when I think about contra dancing, there's a real social aspect to it. Do you feel like socialization is part of a whole treatment modality?
That is a great perspective. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because there's been some good studies that have shown that networking and being associated with groups, one of the factors that has been shown to be associated with longevity. So the people that involved in religion, it's not so much the religion itself that has promotes longevity, but to be involved with the group. And that's one of the reasons we have our support groups. So, I've been maintaining a dystonia support group now for going on 30 years. And it gets people together with like conditions. It produces this networking. And I think that's also very important for our brain, and it does something in our body that is, whether it's, I'm not sure if it's stress release or some other neuroplasticity effect that has been shown to be a factor in long-term health.
A while ago, I was talking to my physician, and I had seen some bad numbers. My blood pressure, my blood glucose, they were all heading in the wrong direction. And so I told him that I was going to make a change to a vegetarian diet. Now, he did not understand that my family, a lot of my social, the people around me, they are vegetarians. So, I have that kind of support. So when I told him that I'm going to stop eating all meat, he was like, no, I don't think you don't have to go that far. I don't think you should do that. And the way that I interpreted that is that he was used to people making these statements like that in the face of some, bad health information they were seeing, and they wouldn't stick with it. There wouldn't be the compliance. And I'm sure that as a practitioner, you have given a lot of direction for patients and have not seen compliance.
Right.
I think that's a good guess. And I wonder if you could talk about that a bit. What are kind of your perspective on what makes a difference when people try to make a significant change?
Right. Just on the side, we're also, my wife and I are also vegetarian for many years, and people have that misconception that you can't get enough protein, and you can have wonderful meals that are much healthier and give you and for athletes, you get plenty of nutrition and protein with the right strategy. There's some of the major athletes in the world are vegetarian or even vegan. It takes strategy and ingenuity to to maintain that. But on the line of compliance, that is one of the major challenges and I totally admit that I'm not as good at it as I would like to be, because I give people opportunities. I tell them every visit about exercise and nutrition. And most of the time they don't follow it. And it's always frustrating. Why don't they show up for this class that I'm giving them? It's free. Just come, but why don't they want to change their lifestyle? And because it's just hard for people to make that step. My son Patrick, who's again more of a wellness practitioner, is really into what's called motivational interviewing that I would like to get better at. The whole concept of that is not, rather than just harping on them and telling them what you should be doing, you try to build up a rapport over time to make it their idea. So the point that they're finally saying, okay, what do I need to do, rather than you telling them? Because so often when you tell someone that they should be doing it, there's a natural resistance or natural tendency for them to resist. And so, but if we can build the knowledge and the trust to build them towards that goal of having them say, okay, now I'm ready. What do I need to do to get healthier? But I agree, it takes time, and most practitioners don't do that. So that's why there's this whole movement to try to change that, to get people to be more fit, to try to stop smoking, to eat right. But there's a big gap there from what we tell people to do and what they actually do.
And even in the face of real life and death, or the potential of limited function, it seems like the consequences of not making change can be really significant, and yet that's not enough to produce change.
That's right. I mean, it's an obvious example is smoking. People know, obviously, it's pretty. Every person knows that this has potentially fatal what they're doing, but yet, that addiction drives them on, or to be uncomfortable to exercise is such a barrier that they just never make that step, even despite just what you're saying, knowing that this could make a huge difference in their lifestyle. That whole idea that we can talk about in a minute how the American medicine would be better if people were more fit.
I think that's a great segue to this question, which is, how big of a difference do you think an active lifestyle makes for the patients that you treat?
Yes, and we know it certainly does. There's a good statistic that they feel that there should be about a 40% less Alzheimer's incidence if people maintained an adequate exercise and adequate lifestyle. So it'd be about 45% less people with Alzheimer's if the American public were in general more active and following, and that's huge. That's millions of people, countless dollars, in our society that could be prevented or reversed if people were in a positive lifestyle. So it's a huge factor, and not just for the brain, but for obviously for other metabolic diseases and heart diseases. I kind of use a analogy sometime or metaphor sometime about aging is that it's like we're paddling in a river. And in that river, there's going to be some small waterfalls along the way. And now they're just inevitable because that's just aging. But if we paddle upstream and keep active, and we can prevent those from happening. Eventually, there's going to be a huge waterfall that's going to take us out. But eventually, we can prevent that from happening by paddling upstream. But for most people, they just kind of follow the stream over the waterfalls. Once you go over one, you can't get back again, and that's the whole idea. For exercise, for example, once you stop, it's really hard to get back to it. It's just something about human nature. So you can, the whole key is never to stop and just maintain. But there's something that we call in American medicine the sedentary death syndrome, and it's really essentially a slow suicide by people being in the sedentary lifestyle, because it leads to deterioration of our body, and all aspects of our body will deteriorate if we're not in an active lifestyle and in eating or not doing things that are negative to our system with the wrong foods and wrong metabolism. There's things that you can do, but you have to take the effort to do it.
I really like that image of paddling in a stream. And, if you're willing to paddle against the current, which is a lot of times what it really feels like, then you can delay some of these events. I like the perspective of paddling and paddling. I'm going to be taken out sometime, but I would rather it be a big event that just takes me out rather than a bunch of little events that limit and take my capacity away slowly over time. And then there's also the perspective of paddling with the stream. It just seems like there's an awful lot of things that are in the grocery store that we can partake of that is paddling with the stream.
Yeah, and exactly. And that kind of, brings to the whole aspect of, besides our exercise aspect of how do you maintain besides our motor, we need to have the internal structure to maintain our muscles and health, and we have to have metabolic health too. You brought that up. There's a lot of problems in our society with people having internal organ dysfunction, even if they're exercising, if they're not doing other things correctly. There's Peter Attia, Dr. Peter Attia has a really good site that deals a lot with metabolic health. He has a book called Outlive, and outlines some of that. For example, there's a lot of people in our society that have fatty livers, even though they're maybe otherwise reasonably healthy because they're eating, too much fructose in their system, and fruity drinks. Even though fructose is good in a limitation with some fruits, that could be poison at a certain point, like carbonated beverages and excessive carbs. Especially as athletes, we need carbs, but the excessive glucose levels are harmful to our system. I've been wearing a continuous glucose monitor for the past couple of years, and a lot of athletes are doing that now. You don't have to have diabetes to be monitoring your glucose levels, because we know that these glucose spikes, the elevated glucose levels, produce oxidative stress that damages blood vessels and again increases incidence of dementia. We have to be aware of what's going on internally to avoid overwhelming our ability to metabolize glucose. Because if you overwhelm your system with too much glucose in the system, you start getting insulin resistance and elevated insulin levels, and that leads to type 2 diabetes, and that leads to oxidative stress that damages the blood vessels and leads to other problems. So we have to be aware of all these metabolic problems besides the importance of exercise alone.
This is my journey. I started cycling. I wanted to reverse some of the things that I was seeing. Was never diagnosed as diabetic. I really think I should have been. I was bouncing right up against that level to be diagnosed as diabetic. I decided to get a continuous glucose monitor that I've been wearing for a little over 2 months now. And wow, I mean, it was an eye opener.
opens your eyes. It definitely does. Yes.
And I wish my doctor would have had that data, because I think I would have been diagnosed as diabetic a while ago. And I'm sure it's been 20 years that my insulin levels, which I've learned now to kind of go upstream from my blood glucose levels and say, okay, this is an insulin issue. And then going from an insulin issue to this is a liver fat, liver function, organ function issue. And so that continuous glucose monitor has really opened my eyes to trying to get upstream, from the issue of how high my blood glucose spikes are.
That's great. And I think it's important for athletes, even without blood sugar abnormalities, because so often people are so aware that they need to eat a lot of carbs, to exercise, but you should be doing that without avoiding the spikes, because those spikes, they can really can cause damage and then eventually lead to more glucose intolerance. It's pretty eye-opening what stress will do. What your glucose levels are at different times of the day, as you probably noticed, you can handle more carbs in the morning than you can later in the day. The sequencing of foods to eat your salads and your roughage first before your proteins, before your carbs. All these things can produce long-term health and prevent the development of glucose intolerance.
For me now, that will be my lifelong journey, is monitoring food, not from a glucose perspective, but from that fat storage and overwhelming, like you mentioned earlier, kind of overwhelming my system with the amount of glucose that I put into it.
Right. Yeah. Just what you need and not too much.
Right. When you look at utilization in your practice, and you gave this number of 40%, which is just a dramatic number, because you're talking about more than a third of people that things could be dramatically changed for them. And so if we could somehow do this dramatic increase in the percentage of fit Americans, do you see your practice changing quite? I mean, like, what do you think would be the impact in your practice as far as maybe of age of onset of when you would see people, or just conditions that you wouldn't see? I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but what do you think would be the impact if, again, one day there was just dramatic increase in the number of fit Americans?
Well, in my particular practice, I don't deal with Alzheimer's disease directly, but that's a major one that would be decreased. But also the same for Parkinson's disease. That's again a neuroprotective by people being adequately fit. But again, all the other aspects of stroke, we're dealing with the neurological aspect here, can be dramatically improved if people were better fit and avoiding blood vessel damage. But just general things that are triggered by stress. There's a lot of people with migraine. When they're major triggers, and developments of some of the chronic headaches can be related to stress disorders, and you can ameliorate that by a good lifestyle with exercise and outlets and meditation and yoga. So there's so many so many examples throughout the entire body, including joint health. People think, you're going to wear out your joints, by exercising. No, it shows just the opposite. The people that are active do not wear out those joints. So our joints are biomechanical. That means they regenerate with exercise, rather than a mechanical, like a car joint that wears down with exercise. So it just throughout the entire body, lifestyle changes would make a dramatic difference in our whole health expenditure throughout the world.
We talked about compliance, and I'm wondering, it seems like mental health plays a big role in compliance. And I'm wondering kind of the interface between what you see professionally in mental health and kind of the impact of being physically active in that realm.
Right. Yeah. For instance, depression. They've shown that exercise, getting into an exercise program, has as much positive effect in relieving depression as antidepressant medication, and that's been shown in studies. Same thing for anxiety, and same thing for sleep disorders. All these things make a difference, including avoiding inflammation in the body with the right diet. So it carries on a lot in the mental health factors, because if people are depressed or have a lot of anxiety, it's another barrier in itself. It's a kind of a contradiction that the exercise it would, and maintaining a good lifestyle would help their depression, anxiety, but their depression, anxiety sometimes is a barrier for them to get motivated to do it. So it's somehow where the human brain quite doesn't correlate there well. But I totally agree with you. That is a big part of our problem because of all the stress that we have in our country.
Thing that I think about when I'm riding, and cycling is my big form of activity until I get dancing. But I think about the risk of a crash and hitting my head. And so I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about the risk of biking and brain injury, and even kind of that risk as we get older.
Right. It comes up pretty often. That people are just worried, especially in traffic. And I agree with you. I worry about it too. We're out there just hoping that this is not going to be the day that because I've had some pretty good bike accidents over time, and that could have been really serious, but fortunately recovered. Yeah, there's always that problem. Although relative to the number of people biking and the number of hours that we're all biking, it's probably really pretty unusual. So I think it's all a risk versus benefit, like any medicine. It's a risk versus benefit, and I think our benefits far outweigh the risks, even though there are those potential risks. It really requires us to be that extra careful and look for the right bike paths and of course, obviously, the helmet.
Do you think that that it is more important as we get older, and even from a transportation planning perspective, if we want older people to be cycling, older people to be active, do you think that's one of the things that needs to be taken into account, that the risk of brain injury does increase when we get older, or is that not? Is there not that much of an increase in risk?
Well, there probably is some increase in risk because of with every one of us, there is some decreased reaction time that just happens. So I think what you said is the transportation planning. We need more bike paths that people can exercise on without the worry of traffic. So often now we're just hoping that the people pay attention, but that doesn't always happen, and we hear about these bad stories every once in a while, but I'm just glad it's more of us are benefiting from biking than those that are injured. So I think it's a risk versus benefit situation, but I think that, I totally agree with you. Transportation planning would be huge for us maintaining ability to continue biking throughout our whole life.
One of the things I hear over and over on the podcast from professionals is that it's never too late to start getting active. It's also never too early to get active, but it's never too late to get active. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's an old adage that I tell people that it's never too late to start and always too early to stop. So in fact, there's been pretty good studies of people in their bedridden in their 90s. That are started on a weight training program that show that even at that point can get development of their muscle strength and increase their function. So we have our sarcomeres, which are elements in our muscles that contract that can wither and be lost over time, but they're always still there, and it just needs the right activation to get them going. The aging effects are inevitable, but the negative effects of aging can be ameliorated by lifestyle. But to maintain our function and our enjoyment in life, we have that option. Like as you were saying earlier, even though we know that's the case, often people don't do it. But we have a fountain of youth in a sense. People are always searching for that fountain of youth. Well, just staying active is important, and I think biking is a big part of it. I think biking is a lifelong remedy to maintain vitality. Biking you can think of it as a lifelong medicine to maintain the vitality of living. And we're never too old to start and always too early to stop. So the goal, when along that of aging, we hear another adage is the goal. I can't remember who said this, but the goal is to die young, but as old as possible. So to die young at 100 is our goal. and whether it is just to maintain our ability to get down the floor and get up off of the floor, and to lift luggage overhead, and to play with grandchildren. There's all kinds of positive aspects of this, but that aren't going to happen if you let our bodies continue to deteriorate.
You had mentioned neuroplasticity before, and I think neuroplasticity is a relatively modern concept. What do you think about maintaining neuroplasticity as you get older? Is that something that a healthy lifestyle contributes to?
Exactly. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, there's no other way that we can develop new neurons and new synaptic connections in our brain other than stimulating them with the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And you cannot get that in any other way other than an exercise program. So even as people are getting older and they're losing some neurological function, like we all do to some degree, you can ameliorate that by maintaining that medicine to your brain, which is exercise. And it's never too late. It equates to at all levels, no matter what their current level of conditioning is. And there's always a level that people can do. They don't have to be major athletes, but there's always a level that they can do to the next step.
So you're one of those young, older, active people. So when you look at your own challenges for staying active and your own opportunities for staying active, how do you think of those personally, about the things that you'll encounter as you get older?
Right, and I agree. I always am concerned about the natural and aging factors, but as I mentioned earlier, I think a goal is really important. We need goals to maintain. At least I do. And I think it's an important part of human nature to have a goal to project towards. So like right now, we're out of the triathlon season, but I have ski seasons coming up with downhill skiing and cross country skiing that I have to maintain conditioning for. Otherwise, I'll be injured. If I'm injured, then I lose functions. And so that's what drives me on. And I'm sure, and there's going to be a time when I will have more and more difficulty doing that because of natural aging effects. But the idea is to stay at your potential, whatever that potential is at that point of time, and not to let it erode any more than it needs to erode. But then toward the summer, we'll get back to triathlons. And my wife is also is going into her 70s this summer. And as a celebration, we're going to do an extended gravel bike trip that we're planning. So it's the whole idea of having something down the road, like a carrot down the road, that brings you forward, whether it's travel or an exercise event, something that pulls you along to the next phase and not allowing yourself to deteriorate.
Is it fair to say that consistency is even more important as you get older?
That is really important. I remember there was a quote from a man that finished a marathon in his 90s. And it says, "How can you do this at 90?" And he said, "You just never stop." Because that's one of the things that happen when people stop for whatever reason. There's something about human nature, and you lose your routine and you stop functioning people just don't get back to it. So the idea is consistency. It's like I said, make it routine, be consistent, and realize that if you're going to say, well, I'm going to take a month or two off, you may not get back to it again. So it's like not stopping your medicine for your blood pressure or whatever. You can't do that because it might kill you. And so exercise is the medicine of life.
You mentioned the gravel bike trip, and I'm wondering if you have any other adventures planned in the near future.
Well, I think everything we do, whether it's a ski trips coming up or a bike trip, we're going to be doing our first ever river cruise that's going to be involved biking on land in between stops next September. So again, that's going to be another goal. We need goals like that.
Where's your cruise going to be?
It's on the Danube.
Okay.
It's going to be fun, and they have little biking trips stops along the way. So that's going to be fun.
That sounds awesome.
we did Glacier National Park this past spring, biking up the Logan Pass, and my wife had some limitations at that time because of a illness that she recovered from. So we had to use an e-bike at the time. But now we have the goal of let's do it again, but let's do it with like a regular bike. So all these things are goals that pull you forward to the next step.
Nice. Well, Dr. Hogan, I'm so thankful that you came on. I know you're busy, and take the time to have this conversation has been wonderful. I am so admiring of the approach you take to your practice and the personal example that you are. I just love all the things that you're talking about, that you're involved in, all the things that you're providing for your patients that can help them make really positive lifestyle changes. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Hogan mentioned to mix up exercise so that we're not just focused on one activity over and over and over. I didn't think to ask, but I would like to get some additional feedback on that perspective. Is it possible to mix up my cycling enough to produce that dynamic? If I'm climbing one day and then going for a long ride another day, is that kind of variety enough? Maybe I need to mix in some mountain biking. I am wondering if I truly need to get off the bike to get the kind of variety he is thinking about. Of course, as I mentioned, I think dancing would definitely bring in a different activity for me, and I do like the atmosphere around contra dancing. I would love to hear what you do to complement cycling. I would also like to hear from people who struggle with maintaining flexibility. I need to stay inspired in that realm. I hope everyone out there is acclimated to the change of seasons and you are enjoying some different scenery. They temporarily closed my bike trail, so I am discovering new routes. So, like me, keep focusing on how to work in more engaging rides. And remember, age is just a gear change.